automated Microsoft Excel filter-driven accounting system, this time constructing the automated trial balance, pulling in information from the general ledger. So get ready and some coffee because we're about to excel at automating Excel. Here we are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started at a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just follow along, possibly building the part of the table that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 3 tabs down below: example, practice, blank. Example, in essence, the answer key. Practice tab having pre-formatted cells, so you could practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay. We will continue to work in the blank tab where we started with a blank worksheet, and we'll continue, in essence, in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only our visualization table skills, but our Excel formatting skills as well, for formatting's sake. So in prior presentations, what we have done thus far is construct the underpinnings of our typical kind of accounting system, that being a chart of accounts. We're using a very kind of basic chart of accounts because our major goal is to look at the automation process, which you can then extend to later. We then added the account numbers, and we added the departments, which will come into play later. The normal kind of vector of direction that accounting is taught in textbooks and makes sense from a human standpoint would be then constructing the journal entry using the chart of accounts as our baseline to pin the information onto in debit and credit format. And then that then is used to post to the general ledger, which is kind of like a trial balance, which is extended, meaning it has all the accounts, but it's only showing one account at a time. And of course, double entry accounting system means multiple accounts are impacted at a time whenever we do a data input. And then we're going to have the trial balance. So that's the next step. If I go to the example tab, we can see that next step over here. Here is our trial balance that we will construct. Now, this is kind of the key that we want to see as everything kind of pulls together, because the trial balance is deceptively simple looking because it actually has a few different kind of, you might think of them as filters or pivots within them that are then used to create the general reports, balance sheet and income statement. So also want to point out, though, that if you think about a QuickBooks system, it might be more likely that you have more of a database kind of logic system where some people call it like you have one truth, which would be the journal entries that are being pinned to or based on the account names that then could be used to construct all of this, right? The general ledger being subsidiary reports from the source documents, and the trial balance could be constructed from the journal entries, possibly in a database. But from a human standpoint, it makes a lot more sense to think about it as journal entries, general ledger, trial balance. And so we want to visualize both of those things as we think about our tables to understand the workings of the tools that we're using and how we can construct those tools if we need to. If I go to a QuickBooks system, remember the general idea would be that you have the forms that are the journal entries. Those are going to make the debits and credits, although they will not be in the form of debits and credits as you do the data input. So we're kind of hiding the debits and credits. That then you can think of as going to a general ledger, but we usually jump directly to the trial balance and then drill down to the general ledger component. So let's go, I'm going to go 123126. So for example, this checking account, if I drill down on it, we get the transaction detail report, which is kind of like the general ledger. If I bring this back to 010126, let's say. So there we have it. So now we have all the detail by date. So most people that just use a QuickBooks or database system are kind of thinking that way. You do the data input, the end result magically happens, which most people don't even think of the trial balance. They go directly to the balance sheet and the income statement. Let's make this 010126. But from a textbook standpoint, from an accounting standpoint, we usually think of the vector that of direction going from journal entry to the general ledger to the trial balance being kind of filtered in order to go to the balance sheet here, which are kind of like half the trial balance, and then the income statement. Now, this kind of move to the balance sheet and the income statement is more deceptively complicated than we would think, because in the trial balance, you kind of have encoded within these accounts more than just the account name to tie the journal entries to. The account types are giving you information as to whether they're what we might call temporary accounts and permanent accounts. All the balance sheet accounts basically being permanent, the income statement accounts being temporary, and that gives us another kind of what you might call as a knob to shift the data from. So in other words, this full trial balance here has all of the data from a number standpoint of this date range of this year. All of the information is here, but if I change the date and I go to 2027, I'm going to have the same data in terms of dollar amount, but I'm going to lose all these accounts at the bottom. Now, when I filter reports, there's three ways you might want to visualize the filtering of the reports. One way is to say that we have a report that's just going to filter by sorting, meaning I could filter this report by just the highest numbers or alphabetical order. The second way would be, and that would just be sorting the report, not a filter perhaps. And then a filter would actually mean we're removing accounts. So maybe we have a department, for example, and I want to eliminate everything that's not in one of the departments. And then the third way is to pivot on something so I have the same information, but it's in a different order. This is kind of the third option, meaning if I change this to 2027, 01/01/27 to 01/01/27, let's say just one day, then I still have the debits and credits evened out, but I don't have any income statement accounts. That looks like a filter, kind of, because we lost all those accounts, but all of the information from a dollar standpoint went into the retained earnings. So that filtering process happens on a yearly basis automatically in most accounting systems that are like for small to mid-sized companies, right? So you can imagine that closing process to happen anytime. You could imagine it to happen like anytime you want, like at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter. But the accounting system does it at the end of the year. That's how it is set up to do. And that restricts it in some way, but also makes it a little bit easier in some way. So if I go back on over to our system here, how can we mirror that in our trial balance? So I only have 10 days of data just to show a small example of how you might automate the filter in a way that's more transparent. That's what Excel does. I can see, a little bit more clearly. The more complicated you get with the formulas, like filter formulas, the harder it is to see. But you could see it pretty clearly in Excel, much more than a database program. So I only have 10 days of data here. These top accounts are balance sheet accounts, what we could call permanent accounts. So we could encode that in some way to call it permanent versus temporary. And then we have the third account type, which is basically the closing account, retained earnings for a corporation, owner's equity for a sole proprietorship or partnership or something like that. So here we have the data down below, which is going to be revenue and expenses. If I sum that up, that would be the net income, 3,992. Now, if I change this to the end of the period, 1/10, then all of that closed out. Now the same 3,992 is here. We didn't lose data from the standpoint of a dollar amount because it's still encoded here, although we did kind of filter because you can remove these accounts at the bottom. They have nothing in them. So it's it's not exactly a filter though, because we're not just removing it. We're changing the like a dial of where the dollars are going from the temporary accounts into the closing account. So, and I could make it so I can change that instead of just like, this would be similar to one time at the end of the year. I could make it at any time. So if it was at 1/1, everything's here. What if it's at 1/5, January 5th, 1/5? Then some of it closed out, right? And some of it's still here. That could be useful, for training purposes. And sometimes you actually want reports that are going to be closed out, at the end of the month or something like that, which is not as easy to do with some of the standard kind of accounting systems. But that's the pivot point that we want to work on this time. So let's go to the blank tab, and I'm going to get a new skinny. I'm going to grab this skinny here, going to go to the home tab, clipboard, format, paint that thing, pull it to the W. I'm just going to call this a trial balance, and I'm going to give it the names of the account number. And I could pull this in. Maybe it would be best to say equals. And I'm pulling this basically in from here, account numbers, so that if I change, I'm trying to tie everything together to the point where I just change one header, and it should change all the related headers, would be a better thing to do. I'm going to say this is going to be equal to the accounts, and then I'm just going to have a date field that we'll put here. So this will be some kind of date field. Let's put 1/10 for now. Now that date field is not formatted the way I would like. So let's right click on it and format it to a date. And I've been using date, this date, 3-14, not having a year, just to make it generic. So it doesn't have a year in it. So I'm just going to say everything's going to happen within a year. So now I'm going to make it 1/1. There it is. I'm going to make this whole thing black and white. Not the date, though. I'm going to make this part black and white. I'll make this black and white. And then this date, I'm going to make that blue, because that's going to be a data input field that we need to do something to. So I'm going to indicate that with this kind of blue, but I'll make it an even more standout blue. So I'll hit the drop down. I'm going to go to more colors, and I'm going to use, in the standard color wheel, I'm going to use this blue. So I'm going to make it really kind of a little bit more bright than this blue is a little duller. Okay. So I'm going to go home tab, font group. We'll hit the drop down. Let's put a border around that. Now I'm just going to pull in the chart of accounts. I'm not going to get into the idea of like, I only want the chart of accounts to show up if there's a number in it. You could try to get more detailed like that, but I'm just going to pull in the whole chart of accounts in our system. So that's just going to equal this chart of accounts. Boom. I would like that not to be a number, but general. I don't need a comma in it. So I'm going to select the whole column. Well, first of all, let's copy it to the right. I'll copy it to the right so that I don't mess up the formatting of this cell. Then I'll select this column and go home tab, number group, drop down, and I want to make it general. And then, so there we have it. So now I'm going to copy these two down because it should pull the relative accounts. So I'll just grab those two, grab the fill handle, pull it down. I'm going to pull it till it goes past there's zeros, okay? I don't want the zeros, so I can delete them and feel fairly confident that we got everything. I'll make this a little larger. I could go up here and just double click, and then I'll make this one a little smaller because we only need it to cover those same 4-digit numbers. Now, I could add the color coding. That might make it a little bit easier for me to identify the formulas that I need to be putting in place for each of these. So I could grab this color coding right there because it's using conditional formatting. Home tab, home tab, clipboard, paintbrush, and I'll put that here. Boom. And it gives me my color coding for assets green, liabilities blue, equities that pink, orange for revenue, and expenses yellow. I'll grab this conditional formatting, home tab, clipboard, paintbrush, and put it here. If that gets too much, too gaudy, you could, of course, take the conditional formatting off, selecting the whole thing and removing it, and say I want to clear the conditional formatting. It's a little tedious, but not too bad. And you might be like, okay, I'm okay with the conditional formatting here, but it's too much to have it on the words. Whatever your preference is, the color is useful to identify quickly if you're dealing with a trial balance. I'm going to go here and put that down here. So just imagine if you had a long trial balance like in Excel here. Just want to point out that I would think like QuickBooks would give a standardized color system. It should, I would think it'd be an obvious thing to do because you don't need to change it all the time. Just give a standard color for at least assets, liabilities, equity, income, expense, so I can see, where the divisions are and that you could turn on and off. How hard would that be? It'd be pretty easy to do. It seems to me like it's a no-brainer. I mean, if you were to think about it, but some people don't like colors because they get politicized or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, so now there's a couple ways we can think about this formula, because note that what I want to do is pull in the numbers, meaning I want to pull in all of the numbers here that combine together within the date range that we're looking at to give me the total. So I want to pull in all of the, and now you could think about it this way, like I want to pull in just the ending number like that. That would be one way that you could build it. And I'll just pull in the running balance. The problem with that, however, is that if I add more data to this, I don't know where the endpoint is going to be in the general ledger. The other way you could do it is just sum equals the sum of the data. And if you have debits positive and credits negative, it'll give you a positive number if it's a debit, a negative number if it's a credit. That again works fine, and that's very, very visual, so you can see exactly where it comes from. I can use this little pointer tool to say that's where it's coming from. That tool, by the way, is in the data. I have it in the formulas and trace. So I put these in the short bar because they're really useful. So that, again, really good, but that means that if I use that formula, that means that if I add another account or something, it's going to mess everything up here. And I have to deal with the fact that if there's an extension to this account, then my formula isn't going to pick it up. So I could try to deal with that by putting all of these accounts side by side to the right and hide the cells that I need. But then you're going to end up with a report that's really long sideways. That's okay kind of in Excel because you could deal with it. But a lot of times when you're trying to demonstrate stuff, you want to have like stuff. I would like my general ledger for demonstration in Excel to be about the size of the trial balance, and then put the rest of the report over here so that I can line up the trial balance side by side to what I'm doing for teaching purposes. That's not optimal for a database system, So in QuickBooks, obviously, everything's going to show up in a vertical fashion downwards, and sometimes that's beneficial. Okay, so right now we want to automate it. So if I automate it, I could pull it from here. Now note that I could imagine pulling the same data from here, which is probably what a database is going to do. How? I could just say, look, find all of the ones that have this account, 1010, and pull the related number. Notice how much easier it is to do that if you make debits positive and credits negative instead of having two separate columns. Why would you have two separate columns? You could still do the double entry accounting system with one. It's just that people get confused about what does it mean to be a debit and credit versus a plus and minus. Well, that's what you have to learn, right? I mean, so it makes a lot of sense to put in one column. Okay. So let's think about how we could put this data in here a different way. Instead of so this is one way I could do it. I'm going to delete that and say no. Let's do it in such a way that it's going to use a sum ifs formula. So I'm going to say. By the way, it also might be useful to have one formula all the way through all of these. So I'm going to start off with a formula that's different depending on if it's a permanent account, temporary account, or the closing account. And then maybe we can think about, well, how might you like consolidate that so I have one formula for all of them based on the conditional formatting of the account number. Okay, so let's first say I'm just going to do a sum if, right? So I'm going to say this is going to be equals sums if. Now, and sum if means I'm going to say I want to sum up this column and do so if this column all the way down has a 1010 in it. Now you can see that that same formula should work here, or it should also work here, right? Because I could take this column and this column, even though they're out of order and they're in order over here. So that's what we'll start with. So I'm going to say equals sum if. Now I always use the sum if with an S. Even if there's only one condition. I think that's the newer formula. So sum if the sum range, that's the range I want it to add up. That's going to be this range, not the running balance, the debits and credits. So I'm going to take this whole bit, and this allows me to have a uniform range for all of these. And I'm going to say F4 on the keyboard because I don't want it to move left, right, up, or down. Therefore, $ before the letters and the numbers. And then comma takes me to the next item, the criteria range. This is the criteria range. So it's going to be from here down to here, meaning if it has 1010 in it. So I'll take that all the way down. I don't need to have a criteria of the name, one or the other, right? Either the name or the number would be fine. If you didn't have account numbers, you could just use the name. And then F4 on the keyboard because I don't want that to move left, right, up, or down. $ before the letters and the numbers. And then comma, what's the criteria? Here's the criteria. Well, the criteria is if it has that cell in it. So the criteria is the last thing in the argument, which is kind of weird. I would have built it like the other way, I think. I don't know why. You'd think it would be the criteria and then find the criteria here and then sum that up. That's how I would think of it. But no. They said sum up this column and based on the criteria range, based on this criteria. The criteria is at the end. Okay. And so I'm not going to make the criteria F4, meaning I'm not going to make it an absolute because I do want it to move down relative when I copy the formula down and enter. Boom. So it does what we would expect. That it pulled that in like we would expect. Now, if I grab that and I just take that fill handle and pull it all the way down, this is what we get, and it looks like it's in balance because it adds up to 0. In other words, if I say this is the total, let's just say this is the same wording as, I think I put it down here somewhere. We have this total debit and credit. I have that same concept here. Total debit and credit should be here. And then I'm going to do the same conditional formatting just so you can see it, even though I could grab this conditional formatting and just say format paint that here. Boom. So that means that like if this changed, like if this was 2 or this was 3 out, wait a sec, 4 out, what's going on here? Hold on. Undo, 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 undo. This should be summing up. This needs to sum up this. Okay. So boom. Okay. So let's just add the conditional format. So I'm gonna go to the Home tab, Style, drop down, and we'll say if it's greater than 2, so we have rounding, then make it red. Boom. Okay, so if this was 3, then it would be red. Okay, undo, and then take it again, drop down. If it's less than -2, make it red. Okay, so if this is -3, it turns red. Okay, undo. And one more, drop down. If it's between -2, tab 2, make it not red, but green. Green is good. And so we'll say, okay, there it is. So now if this is -3, red. +4, red. Back to 0, green. Okay. So that's our conditional formatting. So if I take this and I make it black and white, let's make that black and white. And then this, I'll bracket this whole thing. Put some brackets around that. And then down here, I'll put my net income. Net income. The net income is just the bottom half. So I could say this equals the sum of revenue minus expenses. So now we have the balance sheet on top, income statement. That negative number means it's income because the revenue is greater than the expenses. If you don't like that, if you want the income to be positive, you could just say negative sum. But I like to see it in terms of debits and credits. Otherwise, I'm going to get all mixed up on my signs because it's a trial balance. So I'm just going to say negative means greater credits revenue than debits expenses. Okay. So then let's make this, I'll put this black and white too. I'll put some brackets around that. So that's the general thing. Now the problem is that this isn't automating the closing process, because if I change the date up here, it doesn't automate the closing process. So what I want to do is to be able to demonstrate the closing process in a worksheet to see how that kind of works. And I'm going to imagine that I can close it not at the end of the month per se or the end of the year. I'm just going to close it at any point in time. So if this is the starting point, I'm imagining that this trial balance is as of the whole period, meaning the whole 10 days. This isn't the end of the report. This is where I want the report to start in terms of the income statement. This is the starting date. Therefore, everything that is before this day, I want it to be closed out into equity. So in other words, it has no impact on the balance sheet accounts because they're permanent, except for the equity account, which is equivalent to retained earnings for a corporation, because that's the closing account. And then the temporary accounts will be impacted because anything after this day should be here. Anything before this day needs to be moved here. Okay, so that's our challenge. All right. So let's start. Let's first go to the revenue accounts and see how we can do that. So we're gonna say, okay, so now I'm gonna adjust this to sum if, and I'm gonna add a criteria. So we have sum ifs, and we had our general. This is the sum range. Here's the range. Here's the criteria range. Here's the criteria. That's one sum ifs. Now we're gonna add another ifs. So that means if I go to the end of this and I add another comma, now we have criteria range, the second criteria range. The second criteria range is going to be the date. So I'm going to go down here and say the date, boom, if that date, and then that's the criteria range, and then I'm going to say comma, and the criteria 2, it has to be greater than or equal to, we're going to say, and that's going to be that greater than or equal is spelled out that way, then this cell up top. Now the problem with that is that Excel reads this greater than or equal as text. So I have to put quotes around it because it's a text. So I have to say quote, quote, greater than or equal. And then I have to put an and, because now I have to, whenever I tie text formatting with quotes to something else, I have to tie it together. I think of this and as a knot to tie it to the Z2. That's good. And then the Z2, I want it to be absolute because when I copy this down, I don't want that to move down. So I'm going to say F4 $ before the letter and the number. Okay. So let's see if that works. I'm going to copy that down. Okay. So now wait a second. Something moved down here. Yeah, okay. Hold on. Double click on this. And then I put it on this cell, which is weird. But I need to absolute this cell, F4, F4. That means this range needs $ before both sides of it, $ before the letter and number. And let's try it again. Okay. Then I'm going to copy it down. And I'm going to copy it up to that revenue account. Up to the revenue account. Okay. And the revenue account is now out by so let's say I make this 10. Wait a second. Okay, something was at issue with the date that I entered. So I went over here and I adjusted the 11 over here, and then so I had the date wasn't properly formatted. but now it's pulling it all in there. So if I'm at 1-1, then everything pulls in. If I make this something other than, if I make this 110, now nothing is in the income statement and I'm out of balance because I didn't tell it yet to go into the owner's equity account. If I put this in the middle, 1-5, now we have the partial bit that pulled in here. So that's going to be, that's the key that you can't really do by just saying each of these numbers are going to be equal to the last number in the account. Because when you get to the income statement, if you wanted part of them to be closed out, that's going to be a problem. All right. So now we just have to finish it off and say, okay, this equity account, what does it need to include? There's a shortcut way that you could do this. You could say that this is going to be whatever needs to be there for the plug to make this in balance, right? That's kind of the cheat way to do it. I'd rather do a formula that pulls in this information so that it pulls all the information for the equity account, and then it pulls in the stuff that's after this date over here. So let me show you. If you wanted just a plug, it would look like this. It would just be like something like the negative sum. So sum this up and take the negative of this top bit, close it up, plus the sum of this bottom bit, close it up. That's the plug to put it in balance. And then, hold on, I need this negative to go around the whole thing. Okay, so that's the plug. Now that doesn't give me, as an accountant, I kind of like to have the internal control so that I can see, so that I'm pulling it from the same data. I feel like that, anytime you plug something in there, I kind of feel like, I'd rather do it another way. So let's see if we can pull it from this data, do it a different way. So I'm going to undo that, and this is where we started. We're going to do this in 2 stages and then possibly make an adjustment to it. So if I go into this is where we started with the balance sheet account, where we had some ifs and then the criteria range, the sum range here, the criteria range here, and then the criteria, instead of it just being this, I want it to be any of these because I want to sum up all of these account numbers as long as they are less than the cutoff date, which is 1-5 right now. So one way to do this, so I could try to do this by saying if I have account numbers, pick up everything that's over 3,000 possibly, but I want to just practice these curly cues just to show you that I could pull in each of these accounts even if it was just text, for example. So I could say possibly something like this. These curly brackets, shift, it's going to be the key next to the P on a normal keyboard. I'm just going to type in then 4010, comma, and then I could add 3010, comma, 4010, comma, 5020, comma, 5040, comma, 5060. Now I know this is kind of a tedious way to do it, but you can have a formula that picks all of those up and then close it up with the curly Q and then say comma, and the criteria range then is going to be for criteria 2 is the date range. So these dates, I'm going to select this whole date range, needs to be less than the cutoff. So I'm going to take that whole thing. I don't really need to make it absolute because I'm not going to copy this anywhere. This is a unique for the closing process journal entry. So I need to make it less than this cell. So I need to make it less than that date. But if I say less than, that's they see it as, Excel sees that as text, so I have to put brackets around it or quotations. And anytime I have quotation text, I need to tie it with an and back out. So I have to tie that in with an and. So there we have it. And so if I do that, if I say enter, then I'm missing a comma. Need a comma. And so that gives me the criteria too. Okay. Now, if I do that, it's going to spill to the right. So it spills to the right for each of these conditions. What I want it to do is not spill. I want it to sum these up. I want it to sum those up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the sum function before the spill. So I'm going to go into this, instead of having it sum ifs to spill, I want you to take that would have spilled and sum, put the brackets around it, sum that whole thing, and boom, and there it is. So now I have this thing. Let's test it out. If it's at 1, 1, then everything's on the income statement. If it's at 110, everything's in equity. And if it's at 1, 5, what happened there? 110. If it was at 1, 5, then it's split. Everything that is after 1, 5 is down here, because that's the cutoff date. And then everything that's before that is here. So, and we're always still remaining in balance. Okay, so that's the general idea. Let's just do the alternative. So if I want to copy this to the cell next to it, I'm going to double click here. I'm just going to grab it because I don't want to copy and paste. Otherwise, the relative references will change. So I'm going to go into it, copy the whole thing, paste it here. And then let's just show the alternative and say, well, what if I don't want to use these curly cues and I have account numbers? Then I could just say, I want this whole thing. The condition criteria is that it's got to be greater than, and I could put brackets around that. I have to put these. It has to be greater than. Actually, I might not need it with just a number. It needs to be greater than 3,000. So I need the criteria greater than 3,000, and then the criteria range, which is going to be the date range again. So it's not picking up that because I need the brackets around here. So let's put the brackets around. So brackets or quotes, and then greater than, and then an and 3,000. There it goes. And so now we have it. And so then comma, and then the range needs to be greater than that. So let's say, okay, so now I come up with the same thing. If I make this 1, 1, so now it looks like it's mirroring, looks correct. And then if I make this 1, 5, good, 1, 6, it looks like it's doing the same thing. 1, 10. Okay. So I just want to show those two things just to show these bracketed formulas that you can use, and then this embedding of the sum, and then this formula in order to show that you could simplify it possibly if you had the numbers. And then lastly, you have the plug formula. Let's make this back to 1, 5 that we could use, which would just simply be equals negative bracket sum. I want to take the negative of this, close it up, and the sum of this. So basically just sum everything up and then put the plug in there. That's the other way you could do it. That works on any date, just so you can see those are our alternative views that you can use. I'm going to make this let's make this, put some brackets around it, and there it is. Okay, so now we could say, nah, maybe it would be nice to have one formula all the way down instead of having a different formula here. I'm not going to get into that right now because that'll take a little bit longer, but you can imagine, like, if it was a database program that you would want to say, if it's a permanent account, meaning it has the range from 1 to the 2000s, then do this formula, and then if the range is in the 3000s, then do this formula, and if the range is greater than 4000, you could do this formula. So you can imagine just connecting these three formulas with logic functions, and therefore you're going to end up with one long formula, but the formula will be uniform across, which is something that might be more likely to happen like in a database program. Whereas in Excel, it doesn't really bother us too much to have different formulas through the different cells. So we'll leave it at that. Maybe we'll do one more trial balance pulling. You can imagine pulling this same data possibly from the journal, the journal entries, so that you could see how it might most likely happen from a database, which is thinking in terms of one source of truth or data pulling to all other reports versus what we visualize journal entry to the general ledger to the trial balance, and then vice versa, going back from the trial balance, drilling down into the journal entry, transaction detail report, and then back into the source document, which are like the forms for QuickBooks.